Have you ever been curious on if you can use dry pigments with UV hard curing resin? Well, the answer is yes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to make sub pigments out of like primary colors and stuff that you can use with that. So I use RGH for the most part when it comes to all my pigments, but I do have some of these Cama pigments as well. For a little bit different color variation. So right here I have just your plain Jane cadmium red and your cobalt blue. So these are kind of like your standard primaries, and at equal parts when mixed it creates this color right here. Should it be purple? Yes. But is it like a true purple that you think of in your brain? No, not quite. Then right here with the Cama pigments I have magenta and I have a turquoise, and it makes this really vibrant, almost indigo kind of purple. So you can see the difference, right? And that is at equal parts as well. So when you do decide to make all of your sub pigments, what I recommend is getting a few different variations of your primary colors so that you can create more vibrancy in there, because sometimes you want more of like a highlighter tone and you can't make that out of your just plain cobalt blue and cadmium red and basic yellow. So you do have to get a little creative with it. But today I'm going to be making some magenta and titanium white. I'll be mixing them at equal parts to make just a lighter version to show you what I do, what my process is in mixing my pigments. So you're going to need a mortar and pestle, and all this stuff are linked in the link in my bio as well. There is a wonderful link in there that has every single material that I use when I make cloisonne. So if you're ever interested in any of that, it is all there and you can find it and download it for free and check it out. So I use these little cans, jar things, and they hold roughly about 4 scoops of pigment. So I tend to keep that in mind when I am filling up this little mortar right here. Also, when you are going to do that and take your scoops, make sure you take roughly the same amount every time. Like I always use this little teaspoon right here, and I try to fill it up the same every time if possible. I mean, you could be really particular with it if you wanted to and actually weigh out your pigments. But the issue with that is some pigments weigh more than other pigments, and they have different binders with them too. So sometimes it's easier just to do it by eyeball and adjust as needed. So that's usually what I do. You'll see me do that here. This mortar and pestle has gone through the absolute ringer, as I'm sure you can tell. I've actually worn through the ceramic coating on it and I'm down to some metal, so like good job me. But I would recommend getting all the primary colors and maybe some sub-primary colors, cyan, magenta, and or turquoise if you want to be fancy like me. You can do whatever you want. And start mixing little sub pigments out of it. So try equal parts at first, and then maybe go like, okay, I'll do 1 scoop of this and then 3 scoops of this, and start building your color palette that way. These colors are really interesting to work with because you will realize that some pigments are naturally more opaque or naturally transparent. And that'll make a difference when you mix it with UV resin. Mainly so when it comes to what effect that you want. Me personally, I tend to lean towards opaque colors. I love what they look like when they finish in a cloisonne piece because it looks more like an enamel pin instead of like a piece of stained glass. Granted, if you want to go for that stained glass look, you absolutely can. There's nothing against that. There's no rules when it comes to, you know, creativity and stuff of that matter. However, when you are mixing this pigment with the resin, when the time comes, opaque pigments tend to need a little bit less than the transparent ones when you mix it. And then you might have some interesting troubleshooting to figure out as well. Certain pigments need more, certain pigments need less, but also your resin can only handle so much concentration of pigment. So you'll have to do some trial and error, figure out which colors that you have need less, which ones need more, and figure out with your resin what it can handle. So I would recommend making like a swatch sheet and just doing a bunch of tests and figuring it out for yourself, because every resin is a little bit different and every pigment also is a little bit different. So if you're not using the brands that I use, I can't necessarily help you verbatim. I mean, I can try to guide you as best that I can, but overall, you're gonna wanna kind of stick to these things. So here I am mixing this pigment. It honestly takes about half an hour, start to finish, to fully mix and integrate these 2 colors. The reason that I do mix them the way that I do up front and put them in the jars instead of just like trying to take small scoops of each individual primary color and mixing it kind of like paint is because this is really inconsistent. Like when you try to mix it on your palette part for part, it's dangerous. And I say that with love. It's dangerous because there's always a chance you may have miscalculated how much resin you need. So if you make this really specific skin tone, let's just say, and you don't have it in a jar and you don't have it where you can always take an extra scoop and keep your proportions equal and always have that color, you could end up having a really splotchy art piece if you're filling in a single cell. For example, if you're making like a cloisonne. Or it just may be really inconsistent. Sometimes if you don't fully integrate the pigment into the resin, I personally use a palette knife and I go to town on that thing to make sure that there's not any chunks or little pieces floating around in it. I want it to be as consistent as possible. You may end up with little speckles because you're mixing multiple colors and they haven't been integrated in a mortar and pestle like here. This just kind of cuts out a lot of potential error or happy accidents, so to speak, and keeps things consistent. And it's a lot easier too to see what the color of these two things mixed actually looks like, because sometimes one color naturally is a little bit more overbearing. So even if you do equal parts, what you think the color will turn out to may not actually be what the color is, and it just cuts down on waste. Like if you have to throw away a bunch of resin and pigment, it's a sad day. But overall, the process of it is pretty easy. I mean, it's not hard to grind down pigment together, but you can definitely tell it's a process, and it does take a while. It's a little bit of a labor of love, but it's one that you put more work on the front end and have just a wonderful product at the end. Personally, I love it. It's super fun and easy. If you have any questions at all on mixing pigments and sub-pigments, please let me know. The next little tutorial video that I will do will most likely be mixing the pigment with the resin itself and that process and what that looks like for me as a non-traditional cloisonne artist, so I can give you potential guidance on that. That being said, if you don't work with UV resin and you work with traditional resin as well, I would be very surprised if you couldn't also use some of these methods. I'm sure they roll over, but your proportions and stuff may be a little bit different. But here you can see me really scraping the sides of this little bowl, this poor bowl, because it gets caked up there, and sometimes you'll realize that, oh, there's a lot of white really stuck on the wall here, and you have to really mix it up. I've seen some people try to put things in blenders, but blenders don't necessarily merge the pigments the way that you want them to. Another thing to keep in mind, certain pigments are also naturally wetter than others. Some are so dry that if you breathe in the wrong direction, it just flies everywhere. And that stuff is the worst. So that's why I have a paper towel down, because this is gonna be a very messy process. I also get completely covered in it. So no matter how hard you try, it's gonna be messy, but it's part of art. It's what you do. But I'm gonna go ahead and speed this video up so you don't have to sit through half an hour of me just scraping a bowl. Okay? See you in a minute. And now you can see me clearing this thing off. We're about to put it in our little jars and label those bad boys. And then this color pigment variation is done. Oh, and another thing too. If you're realizing that one of your colors is transparent and you really want to make it more like vibrant, but also not transparent, more opaque, you can always add just a wee bit of white to it, and it may technically it does change the pigment a little bit, but it will help fix that. And that's usually a trick that I do quite often. But yeah, so you go ahead and clean off your mortar and pestle the best that you freaking can. Granted, it does take a little bit of time and energy to scrape all this out. But you can see, like, if you just kind of like basically scrape it, you're only gonna get maybe 1 or 2 little scoops out of it. Like, you really have to scrape all of the sides the best that you can in order to get all of the pigment that you put into there. And you don't want to waste any of that stuff because, one, it's your money and you just spent all this time and labor to make this color. You want to keep it and get as much of it as you can. So this is the part that can be a little dangerous. Turn off all fans in the room. Speaking from experience, you don't want none of that flying all over your clothes. If I had $1 for every time my pants turned bright blue and green and yellow, I could buy me a whole brand new set of pants. It's absolutely true. But yeah, so you're gonna go ahead and mix it up just like this. You're gonna put it in your little jar and you're good to go. So just do this with a rainbow variations, skin tones, if you want to add light and dark combinations too. It's gonna take a long time, but trust me, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. I have zero regrets doing it. However, now I do have a basket full of about 50 jars of different colors, but I still love it. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I know this is a longer video, but if you guys want tutorials, I want to give it as much time and energy and thought that I can. So let me know what questions you have. I will do my best to answer them as soon as possible. And the next one will be adding pigment to some resin, or it might be doing basic line work, or both. Who knows? Either way, you're gonna get them all eventually, because I want to completely teach you guys how to make cloisonne, non-traditional cloisonne, the way that I do, because I had to do all of this research on my own and trial and error on my own. And oh my gosh, it took a solid like 4 years to get me to where I am now. So I'm trying to speed up the process for you guys so you can go have fun and make all of the fun things that you want. But anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day and you enjoy the rest of this tutorial, which I'm going to speed up.